please go to bbc.co.uk/Radio 4. I hope you enjoy the programme. Hello, on the 22nd of January 1879, as the British tried to invade their kingdom, an army of African warriors, armed mainly with iron spears, attacked an advance column of the Imperial Army. Despite facing an enemy equipped with modern rifles and artillery, the Zulu subjected the invaders to a famous, humiliating defeat. Even as they moved to break the power of the Zulu, the British Empire remained haunted by the mythology of a terrifying martial race. The victory of the Zulu beneath the mountain of Isandlwana was the last great triumph in almost a century of political dominance. At the dawn of the 19th century, the Zulu were a small, undistinguished clan living near the east coast of southern Africa. But in the 1820s, they expanded their domain at breathtaking speed, conquering a swathe of surrounding peoples and sending thousands more fleeing in their wake. The man often credited with pioneering the Zulu's astonishing rise was the great military strategist Shaka. But the history of the Zulu is also shaped by vast economic changes culminating with the discovery of diamonds. With me to discuss the rise and fall of the Zulu nation are Saul Jubo, Professor of History at the University of Sussex, Shula Marks, Emeritus Professor of History at the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, and Saul David, Professor of War Studies at the University of Buckingham. Saul David, can you give us a sense of who the Zulus were before the rise of Shaka?
Well, they were a relatively insignificant clan, the Nguni clan, but part of the wider, of course, Bantu people who'd migrated a century earlier from mid-Natal to their current homeland on the mid-Mfolozi River. And it was, to give you a sense of their size, we don't know the exact numbers, but possibly as few as 1,500 people, and an area as small as 10 square miles. And
what did they do? How did they subsist? What was their economy?
Well, they're pastoral people whose wealth is measured in terms of cattle, but their chief staple diet was sour milk, known as amazi, and also maize. So they wouldn't eat their cattle, of course, because their cattle was their wealth.
And so we've got the numbers, we've got their place. And were they penned into these 10 square miles, or were they nomadic?
They effectively lived in that particular area. Their cattle would graze over that area. Of course, one of the great movements towards centralisation of the tribes of this area was competition for land as the populations expanded. But at this particular time, they were effectively penned in this relatively small area.
Would they be fighting other neighbouring tribes to get a bit more land here and there?
There would have been almost ritual warfare going on at this time. There's very little in the way of actual destructive warfare, and this, of course, is what the Zulus were able to adapt and were able to use to their great advantage.
What do you mean by ritual warfare?
Well, the warfare was effectively throwing spears. It was a show of force in which the defeated side would live to fight another day. So though you'd fight against your enemy, you'd rarely take over his territory.
Now, we're told that Shaka changed all this. Can you tell us something about him?
He's an extraordinary man, Shaka. I mean, he is born in 1787, the son of the chief of the Zulu, and it's, of course, an insignificant tribe even then. But although he was the eldest son, he wasn't the designated heir, and this wasn't unusual among the Zulus because the heir would tend to come from the great wife, and the great wife was often only taken by the chief late in life to prevent the danger of usurpation. So Shaka's born not as the designated...
So he was polygamous, the chief. Yeah.
Exactly. And Shaka, although he's the eldest, he's also born with a certain amount of stigma, hence his name, because Shaka is Zulu for intestinal beetle, and that was the excuse given for the inopportune pregnancy that led to Shaka's birth. He was actually born, or at least conceived, out of wedlock.
How did he get to be chief of the Zulus then?
Well, it's a long and rather tortuous road, actually, because he leaves the Zulu tribe with his mother. When he's only 7, he's sent to the neighbouring Ilangeni tribe, which is actually her tribe. And even there he doesn't settle, and he moves from the Ilangeni tribe to the Matetwa. And the Matetwa are important in this story because they are effectively the paramount tribe of the area. But you don't think of them as any more than basically very loose overlords. They control very loosely a confederation of about 50 tribes, one of which was the Zulu. Now, it's during his time with the Matetwa, with the subclan of the Matetwa, that Shaka really begins to develop his military prowess, and he quickly comes to the notice of the paramount chief, a man called Job, and his successor after Job's death in 1807, Dingiswayo. And it's during his time with Dingiswayo's armies fighting for 7 years, from 1807 to 1816, for 9 years, from 1807 to 1816, that Shaka begins to develop the political and military philosophy that he will use to bring his father's tribe to greatness.
And at the time in that place, it was remarkable, wasn't it?
It was remarkable because, as I've already pointed out, wars were rarely decisive, battles were rarely decisive. The way Shaka changed all this is by two things. He changed the philosophy of war so that they would actually become battles of destruction, and he also changed the weapons and tactics of war. He began to introduce something known as the short stabbing spear, the ikluwa. We don't think that he invented it, but he certainly made its use common, particularly among the regiment that he commanded of the Matetwa. And this meant, of course, that you had to close with your enemy, that it was close quarter fighting. He also used envelopment tactics that would use part of the regiment to fix the enemy and two wings to surround it so that there was no escape. And after the destruction of the enemy, the ultimate sort of end of his political philosophy was to absorb the beaten enemy into that particular tribe.
Shula Marks, to what extent was the rise of the Zulu under Shaka a consequence of broader changes?
I think that one needs to see the rise of several kingdoms in this period, late 18th, early 19th century. Although we focus on the Zulu and Shaka, in a sense that's almost a product of the war which came against the British in 1879 and the accident that the first white observers in this area came upon Shaka in his heyday. But what we're now beginning to understand from much more careful work on oral tradition, on archaeology, on the context in which Shaka arose, is that he was not quite as unique as we would like to make out. By the end of the 18th century, there's evidence from a number of places in South Africa, among the Sotho-Tswana, for example, over on the west side of South Africa on the Highveld, among the Cape Africans, and indeed among the Africans living in the area which we now call KwaZulu-Natal, of consolidation, of the creation of much larger chiefdoms, not simply clans, not simply even single ethnic chiefdoms, but multi-ethnic chiefdoms. And many of the innovations which conventionally have been associated with Shaka were already being experimented with, if you like, by a number of these chiefdoms in northern Natal, KwaZulu-Natal. Part of the impetus for that seems to have come from the trading relationship with Delagoa Bay, present-day Lorenzo Marques in Mozambique, present-day Maputo. In fact, it used to be called Lorenzo Marques in Maputo, where ships were calling through from the 16th century.
How did that
really
stimulate the economy?
Well, because you began to get increasing numbers of ships calling at the bay, wanting ivory, which was a key export, wanting cattle, food for the ships, which was not only a key export but also very significant in the actual social structure of the...
But how did it actually affect what was going on there?
Well, because in order to trade ivory, you have to kill elephants, and in order to kill elephants, you need large numbers of people, especially if you don't have firearms. But trade in southern Africa goes right back, I mean, as far back almost as we have archaeological evidence of the Iron Age.
The context is well established. I'd really like to concentrate on the Zulus for this program.
Yes, but you're asking me how
absolutely.
we know that the trade affected it.
Yeah.
Well, once you start trading cattle, people start competing over selling the cattle because they're getting commodities which they really value, including beads, which form a kind of currency in much of southern Africa before the 19th century and into the 19th century, going back to the 10th century from India. So these kingdoms begin to fight with one another, to control the trade to the north. And there may also have been a complicating factor that there's the beginning of a slave trade round Delagoa Bay as well. But there are also ecological changes in this period, and new crops come into the area. So you're getting a population increase by the late 18th century, a massive famine at the beginning of the 19th century. And in that context, chiefdoms start fighting with one another. I mean, it is a period of enormous turbulence in a number of places across South Africa. by the early 19th century.